Georg Friedrich Händel 23 February 1685 April 14, 1759, April 14, 1759 was a German-born Baroque composer famous for his operas, oratorios, anthems and organ concertos. Born in a family indifferent to music, Händel received critical training in Halle, Hamburg and Italy before settling in London, and became a naturalized British subject in 1727. He was strongly influenced both by the great composers of the Italian Baroque and the Middle German polyphonic choral tradition. Within 15 years, Händel had started 3 commercial opera companies to supply the English nobility with Italian opera. Musicologist Winton Dean writes that his operas show that Händel was not only a great composer. He was a dramatic genius of the first order. As Alexander's Feast was well received, Händel made a transition to English choral works. After his success with Messiah he never performed an Italian opera again. It has been said that the passion of Händel's oratorios is an ethical one, and that they are hallowed not by liturgical dignity but by moral ideals of humanity. Almost blind, and having lived in England for nearly 50 years, he died in 1759, a respected and rich man. His funeral was given full state honours, and he was buried in Westminster Abbey. Händel is regarded as one of the greatest composers of the Baroque era, with works such as Water Music, Music for the Royal Fireworks and Messiah remaining popular. One of his 4 coronation anthems, Zadok the Priest, composed for the coronation of George II of Great Britain, has been performed at every subsequent British coronation, traditionally during the sovereign's anointing. Händel composed more than 40 operas in over 30 years, and since the late 1960s, with the revival of Baroque music and historically informed musical performance, interest in Händel's operas has grown. Early years. Händel was born in 1685 in Halle, Duchy of Magdeburg, to Georg Friedrich Händel and Dorothea Torst. His father, 63 when Georg Friedrich was born, was an eminent barber surgeon who served the court of Saxe-Weissenfels and the Margraviate of Brandenburg. According to Händel's first biographer, John Mannering, he had discovered such a strong propensity to music, that his father, who always intended him for the study of the civil law, had reason to be alarmed. He strictly forbade him to meddle with any musical instrument, but Händel found means to get a little clavichord privately conveyed to a room at the top of the house. To this room he constantly stole when the family was asleep. At an early age Händel became a skillful performer on the harpsichord and pipe organ. Händel and his father travelled to Weissenfels to visit either Händel's half-brother, Karl, or nephew, Georg Christian, who was serving as valet to Duke Johann Adolph I. On this trip, young Händel was lifted onto an organ stool, where he surprised everyone with his playing. This performance helped Händel and the Duke to convince his father to allow him to take lessons in musical composition and keyboard technique from Friedrich Wilhelm Zacko, the organist of Halle's Marienkirche. Zacko composed music for the Lutheran services at the church, and from him Händel learned about harmony and counterpoint, copying and analyzing scores, and gained instruction on the oboe, violin, harpsichord and organ. In 1698 Händel played for Frederick I of Prussia and met Giovanni Bononcini in Berlin. From Halle to Italy. In 1702, following his father's wishes, Händel started studying law under Christian Lemasius at the University of Halle. He earned an appointment for 1 year as the organist in the former cathedral, by then an evangelical Reformed church. Händel seems to have been unsatisfied, and in 1703 he accepted a position as violinist and harpsichordist in the orchestra of the Hamburg Oper in Gar Markt. There he met the composers Johann Matthiessen, Christoph Graupner and Reinhard Kieser. His first 2 operas, Armira and Nero, were produced in 1705. He produced 2 other operas, Daphne and Florindo, in 1708. It is unclear whether Händel directed these performances. According to Mannering, in 1706 Händel travelled to Italy at the invitation of Ferdinando de' Medici, but Mannering must have been confused. It was Giangasto de' Medici, whom Händel had met in 1703–1704 in Hamburg. Ferdinando tried to make Florence Italy's musical capital, attracting the leading talents of his day. He had a keen interest in opera. In Italy, Handel met librettist Antonio Salvi, with whom he later collaborated. Handel left for Rome and, since opera was banned in the Papal States, composed sacred music for the Roman clergy. His famous Dirigit Dominus is from this era. He also composed cantatas in pastoral style for musical gatherings in the palaces of Cardinals Pietro Ottoboni, Benedetto Pamphili and Carlo Colonna. 2 oratorios, La Risurrezione and Il Trionfo del Tempo, were produced in a private setting for Ruspoli and Ottoboni in 1709 and 1710, respectively. Rodrigo, his first all-Italian opera, was produced in the Cocumro Theatre in Florence in 1707. Agrippina was first produced in 1709 at Teatro San Giovanni Grisostomo, owned by the Grimanis. The opera, with a libretto by Cardinal Vincenzo Grimani, and according to Mannering it ran for 27 nights successively. The audience, thunderstruck with the grandeur and sublimity of his style, applauded for Il Caro Sasson. Moved to London. In 1710, Handel became Kapellmeister to German Prince George, the Elector of Hanover, who in 1714 would become King George I of Great Britain and Ireland. He visited Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici and her husband in Darwan Court Düsseldorf on his way to London in 1710. With his opera Rinaldo, based on La Gerusalemme Liberata by the Italian poet Torquato Tasso, Handel enjoyed great success, although it was composed quickly, with many borrowings from his older Italian works. This work contains one of Handel's favorite arias, Cara Sposa, Amante Cara, and the famous Lasciatrio Pianga. In 1712, Handel decided to settle permanently in England. He received a yearly income of £200 from Queen Anne after composing for her the Utrechtse Doom and Jubilati, first performed in 1713. One of his most important patrons was the 3rd Earl of Burlington and 4th Earl of Cork, a young and incredibly wealthy member of an Anglo-Irish aristocratic family. For the young Lord Burlington, Handel wrote Amadigi di Gaula, a magical opera, about a damsel in distress, based on the tragedy by Antoine Haudet de la Motte. The conception of an opera as a coherent structure was slow to capture Handel's imagination and he composed no operas for 5 years. In July 1717 Handel's water music was performed more than 3 times on the Thames for the king and his guests. It is said the compositions spurred reconciliation between the king and Handel. Canons. In 1717 Handel became house composer at Canons in Middlesex, where he laid the cornerstone for his future choral compositions in the 12 Chandosi anthems. Romain Rolland stated that these anthems were as important for his oratorios as the cantatas were for his operas. Another work he wrote for the first Duke of Chandos, the owner of Canons, was Asses in Galatia. During Handel's lifetime it was his most performed work. Winton Dean wrote, "The music catches breath and disturbs the memory." In 1719 the Duke of Chandos became one of the main subscribers to Handel's new opera company, the Royal Academy of Music, but his patronage of music declined after he lost money in the South Sea Bubble, which burst in 1720 in one of history's greatest financial cataclysms. Handel himself invested in South Sea stock in 1716, when prices were low and sold before 1720. Royal Academy of Music. In May 1719, the first Duke of Newcastle, the Lord Chamberlain, ordered Handel to look for new singers. Handel travelled to Dresden to attend the newly built opera. He sought Teofane by Antonio Lotti, and engaged members of the cast for the Royal Academy of Music, founded by a group of aristocrats to assure themselves a constant supply of Baroque opera or opera seria. Handel may have invited John Smith, his fellow student in Halle, and his son Johann Christoph Schmidt, to become his secretary and amanuensis. By 1723 he had moved into a Georgian house at 25 Brook Street, which he rented for the rest of his life. This house, where he rehearsed, copied music and sold tickets, is now the Handel House Museum. During 12 months between 1724 and 1725, Handel wrote 3 outstanding and successful operas, Giulio Cesare, Tamerlano and Rodelinda. Handel's operas are filled with da capo arias, such as Sfigliotta v Nelcor. After composing Silde Fenti, he concentrated on opera and stopped writing cantatas. Scipio, from which the regimental slow march of the British Grenadier Guards is derived, was performed as a stopgap, waiting for the arrival of Faustina Bordoni. In 1727 Handel was commissioned to write 4 anthems for the coronation ceremony of King George II. One of these, Zadok the Priest, has been played at every British coronation ceremony since. In 1728 John Gay's The Beggar's Opera premiered at Lincoln's Inn Fields Theatre and ran for 62 consecutive performances, the longest run in theatre history up to that time. After 9 years the Royal Academy of Music ceased to function, but Handel soon started a new company. The Queen's Theatre at the Haymarket, established in 1705 by architect and playwright John Vaughan Brew, quickly became an opera house. Between 1711 and 1739, more than 25 of Handel's operas premiered there. In 1729 Handel became joint manager of the theatre with John James Heidegger. Handel travelled to Italy to engage new singers and also composed 7 more operas, among them the comic masterpiece Partenope and the magic opera Orlando. After 2 commercially successful English oratorios Esther and Deborah, he was able to invest again in the South Sea Company. Handel reworked his Assis and Galatea, which then became his most successful work ever. Handel failed to compete with the opera of the nobility, who engaged musicians such as Johann Adolf Haas, Niccolo Porpora and the famous castrato Farinelli. The strong support by Frederick, Prince of Wales, caused conflicts in the royal family. In March 1734 Handel composed a wedding anthem, This is the day which the Lord hath made, and a serenata Parnaso in Festa for Anne of Hanover. Despite the problems the opera of the nobility was causing him at the time, Handel's neighbour in Brook Street, Mary Delany, reported on a party she invited Handel to at her house on April 12, 1734, where he was in good spirits. I had Lady Rich and her daughter, Lady Cath Homer and her husband, Mr. and Mrs. Percival, Sir John Stanley and my brother, Mrs. Donnellan, Strada, star soprano of Handel's operas, and Mr. Coote. Lord Shaftesbury begged of Mr. Percival to bring him, and being a professed friend of Mr. Handel was admitted. I never was so well entertained at an opera. Mr. Handel was in the best humour in the world, and played lessons and accompanied Strada and all the ladies that sang from 7 o'clock till 11. I gave them tea and coffee, and about half an hour after 9 had a salver brought in of chocolate, mulled white wine and biscuits. Everybody was easy and seemed pleased. Opera at Covent Garden. In 1733 the Earl of Essex received a letter with the following sentence: Handel became so arbitrary a prince, that the town murmurs. The Board of Chief Investors expected Handel to retire when his contract ended, but Handel immediately looked for another theatre. In cooperation with John Rich he started his 3rd company at Covent Garden Theatre. Rich was renowned for his spectacular productions. He suggested Handel use his small chorus and introduced the dancing of Marie Sala copyright, for whom Handel composed Terpsichore. In 1735 he introduced organ concertos between the acts. For the first time Handel allowed Gioacchino Conti, who had no time to learn his part, to substitute arias. Financially, Ariodante was a failure, although he introduced ballet suites at the end of each act. Alcina, his last opera with a magic content, and Alexander's Feast or the Power of Music based on John Dryden's Alexander's Feast starred Anna Maria Strada del Pascal Squared and John Beard. In April 1737, at age 52, Handel apparently suffered a stroke which disabled the use of 4 fingers on his right hand, preventing him from performing. In summer the disorder seemed at times to affect his understanding. Nobody expected that Handel would ever be able to perform again. But whether the affliction was rheumatism, a stroke or a nervous breakdown, he recovered remarkably quickly. To aid his recovery, Handel had travelled to Aachen, a spa in Germany. During 6 weeks he took long hot baths, and ended up playing the organ for a surprised audience. Dedemeier, his last opera, was performed 3 times in 1741. Handel gave up the opera business, while he enjoyed more success with his English oratorios. Oratorio. Il trionfo del tempo e del disinganno, an allegory. Handel's first oratorio was composed in Italy in 1707, followed by La Resurrezione in 1708, which uses material from the Bible. The circumstances of Esther and its first performance, possibly in 1718, are obscure. Another 12 years had passed when an act of piracy caused him to take up Esther once again. 3 earlier performances aroused such interest that they naturally prompted the idea of introducing it to a larger public. Next came Deborah, strongly colored by the coronation anthems, and Athalia, his first English oratorio. In these 3 oratorios Handel laid the foundation for the traditional use of the chorus which marks his later oratorios. Handel became sure of himself, broader in his presentation, and more diverse in his composition. It is evident how much he learned from Arcangelo Corelli about writing for instruments, and from Alessandro Scarlatti about writing for the solo voice. But there is no single composer who taught him how to write for chorus. Handel tended more and more to replace Italian soloists by English ones. The most significant reason for this change was the dwindling financial returns from his operas. Thus a tradition was created for oratorios which was to govern their future performance. The performances were given without costumes and action. The singers appeared in their own clothes. In 1736 Handel produced Alexander's Feast. John Beard appeared for the first time as one of Handel's principal singers and became Handel's permanent tenor soloist for the rest of Handel's life. The piece was a great success and it encouraged Handel to make the transition from writing Italian operas to English choral works. In Saul, Handel was collaborating with Charles Jennens and experimenting with 3 trombones, a carillon and an extra-large military kettle drums, to be sure. It will be most excessive noisy. Saul and Israel in Egypt, both from 1739, head the list of great, mature oratorios, in which the da capo aria became the exception and not the rule. Israel in Egypt consists of little else but choruses, borrowing from the funeral anthem for Queen Caroline. In his next works Handel changed his course. In these works he laid greater stress on the effects of orchestra and soloists. The chorus retired into the background. L'Allegro, il penseroso ed il moderato has a rather diverting character. The work is light and fresh. During the summer of 1741, the 3rd Duke of Devonshire invited Handel to Dublin, capital of the Kingdom of Ireland, to give concerts for the benefit of local hospitals. His Messiah was first performed at the New Music Hall in Fishamble Street on April 13, 1742, with 26 boys and 5 men from the combined choirs of St. Patrick's and Christ Church cathedrals participating. Handel secured a balance between soloists and chorus which he never surpassed. In 1747 Handel wrote his oratorio Alexander Ballus. This work was produced at Covent Garden Theatre on March 23, 1748, and to the aria Hark! Hark! He strikes the golden lyre. Handel wrote the accompaniment for mandolin, harp, violin, viola, and violoncello. The use of English soloists reached its height at the first performance of Samson. The work is highly theatrical. The role of the chorus became increasingly important in his later oratorios. Jephthah was first performed on February 26, 1752. Even though it was his last oratorio, it was no less a masterpiece than his earlier works. Later years. In 1749 Handel composed music for the royal fireworks. 12,000 people attended the first performance. In 1750 he arranged a performance of Messiah to benefit the Foundling Hospital. The performance was considered a great success and was followed by annual concerts that continued throughout his life. In recognition of his patronage, Handel was made a governor of the hospital the day after his initial concert. He bequeathed a copy of Messiah to the institution upon his death. His involvement with the Foundling Hospital is today commemorated with a permanent exhibition in London's Foundling Museum, which also holds the Gerald Coke Handel collection. In addition to the Foundling Hospital, Handel also gave to a charity that assisted impoverished musicians and their families. In August 1750, on a journey back from Germany to London, Handel was seriously injured in a carriage accident between The Hague and Haarlem in the Netherlands. In 1751 one eye started to fail. The cause was a cataract which was operated on by the great charlatan Chevalier Taylor. This did not improve his eyesight, but possibly made it worse. He died 8 years later in 1759 at home in Brook Street, at age 74. The last performance he attended was of Messiah. Handel was buried in Westminster Abbey. More than 3,000 mourners attended his funeral, which was given full state honours. Handel never married, and kept his personal life private. His initial will bequeathed the bulk of his estate to his niece Johanna, however 4 codicils distributed much of his estate to other relations, servants, friends and charities. Handel owned an art collection that was auctioned posthumously in 1760. The auction catalogue listed approximately 70 paintings and 10 prints. Works. Main articles, list of compositions by Georg Friedrich Händel and list of operas by Handel. Handel's compositions include 42 operas, 29 oratorios, more than 120 cantatas, trios and duets, numerous arias, chamber music, a large number of ecumenical pieces, odes and serenatas, and 16 organ concerti. His most famous work, the oratorio Messiah with its Hallelujah chorus, is among the most popular works in choral music and has become the centerpiece of the Christmas season. Among the works with opus numbers published and popularized in his lifetime are the organ concertos Op. 4 and Op. 7, together with the Opus 3 and Opus 6 concerti grossi. The latter incorporate an earlier organ concerto The Cuckoo and the Nightingale, in which birdsong is imitated in the upper registers of the organ. Also notable are his 16 keyboard suites, especially the harmonious Blacksmith. Handel introduced previously uncommon musical instruments in his works, the viola d'amore and violetta marina, the lute, 3 trombones, clarinets or small high cornets, theorbo, French horn, lyricord, double bassoon, viola da gamba, bell chimes, positive organ, and harp. Catalogues. Between 1787 and 1797 Samuel Arnold compiled a 180-volume collection of Handel's works however it was far from complete. Also incomplete was the collection produced between 1843 and 1858 by the English Handel Society. The 105-volume Haarkarensiendelgesellschaft edition was published between 1858 and 1902 mainly due to the efforts of Friedrich Handel. For modern performance, the realization of the basso continuo reflects 19th-century practice. Vocal scores drawn from the edition were published by Novello in London, but some scores, such as the vocal score to Samson, are incomplete. The continuing Hallische Haarkarensiendelausgabe edition was first inaugurated in 1955 in the Halle region in Saxony-Anhalt, eastern Germany. It did not start as a critical edition, but after heavy criticism of the first volumes, which were performing editions without a critical apparatus, it repositioned itself as a critical edition. Influenced in part by Cold War realities, editorial work was inconsistent, misprints are found in abundance and editors failed to consult important sources. In 1985 a committee was formed to establish better standards for the edition. The unification of Germany in 1990 removed communication problems, and the volumes issued have since shown a significant improvement in standards. Between 1978 and 1986 the German academic Bund Beselt catalogued Handel's works in his Haarkarensiendelwerke Verzeichnis publication. The catalogue has achieved wide acceptance and is used as the modern numbering system, with each of Handel's works designated an HWV number, for example Messiah is catalogued as HWV 56. Legacy. Handel's works were collected and preserved by 2 men, Sir Samuel Helier, a country squire whose musical acquisitions form the nucleus of the Shaw-Helier collection, and the abolitionist Granville Sharp. The catalogue accompanying the National Portrait Gallery exhibition marking the tercentenary of the composer's birth calls them 2 men of the late 18th century, who have left us solid evidence of the means by which they indulged their enthusiasm. After his death, Handel's Italian operas fell into obscurity, except for selections such as the aria from Circe, Ombra mi fata the First. The oratorios continued to be performed, but not long after Handel's death they were thought to need some modernization, and Mozart orchestrated a German version of Messiah and other works. Throughout the 19th century and first half of the 20th century, particularly in the Anglophone countries, his reputation rested primarily on his English oratorios, which were customarily performed by enormous choruses of amateur singers on solemn occasions. The centenary of his death, in 1859, was celebrated by a performance of Messiah at the Crystal Palace, involving 2,765 singers and 460 instrumentalists, who played for an audience of about 10,000 people. Since the early music revival, many of the 42 operas he wrote have been performed in opera houses and concert halls. Giulio Cesare, Milano and Rodelinda, each on a libretto by Nicola Francesco Haim, stand out and are considered as masterpieces, each in a different style. Handel's music was studied by composers such as Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven. Recent decades have revived his secular cantatas and what one might call secular oratorios or concert operas. Of the former, Ode for St. Cecilia's Day and Ode for the Birthday of Queen Anne are noteworthy. For his secular oratorios, Handel turned to classical mythology for subjects, producing such works as Acis and Galatea, Hercules and Semele. These works have a close kinship with the sacred oratorios, particularly in the vocal writing for the English-language texts. They also share the lyrical and dramatic qualities of Handel's Italian operas. As such, they are sometimes performed on stage by small chamber ensembles. With the rediscovery of his theatrical works, Handel, in addition to his renown as instrumentalist, orchestral writer, and melodist, is now perceived as being one of opera's great musical dramatists. Handel's work was edited by Samuel Arnold, and by Friedrich Handel, for the German Hörkurarengesellschaft. Hörkurarengesellschaft adopted the spelling Georg Friedrich Handel on his naturalization as a British subject, and this spelling is generally used in English-speaking countries. The original form of his name, Georg Friedrich Händel, is generally used in Germany and elsewhere, but he is known as Händel in France. Another composer with a similar name, Handel or Händel, was an Austrian from Carniola and is more commonly known as Jacobus Gallus. Reception: Handel has generally been accorded high esteem by fellow composers, both in his own time and since. Bach attempted, unsuccessfully, to meet with Handel while he was visiting Halle. Mozart is reputed to have said of him, "Handel understands effect better than any of us. When he chooses, he strikes like a thunderbolt." To Beethoven, he was the master of us all. The greatest composer that ever lived. I would uncover my head and kneel before his tomb. Beethoven emphasized above all the simplicity and popular appeal of Handel's music when he said, "Go to him to learn how to achieve great effects, by such simple means." Homages. After Handel's death, many composers wrote works based on or inspired by his music. The first movement from Louis Spoh's Symphony No. 6, Op. 116, The Age of Bach and Handel, resembles two melodies from Handel's Messiah. In 1797 Ludwig van Beethoven published the 12 variations in G major on a C the Conquer unregistered trademark Ring Kormas a unregistered trademark from Judas Maccabeus by Handel, for cello and piano. In 1822 Beethoven composed the Consecration of the House Overture, which also bears the influence of Handel. Guitar virtuoso Mauro Giuliani composed his variations on a theme by Handel, Op. 107 for guitar, based on Handel's Suite No. 5 in E major, HWV 430, for harpsichord. In 1861, using a theme from the second of Handel's harpsichord suites, Johannes Brahms wrote the Variations and Fugue on a theme by Handel, Op. 24, one of his most successful works. Several works by the French composer Far copyright Alexander Guillemot use Handel's themes, for example his March on a theme by Handel uses a theme from Messiah. French composer and flautist Philippe Gourbet wrote his Petite March for flute and piano based on the fourth movement of Handel's Trio Sonata, Op. 5, No. 2, HWV 397. Argentine composer Luis Gianneo composed his variations on a theme by Handel for piano. In 1911, Australian-born composer and pianist Percy Grainger based one of his most famous works on the final movement of Handel's Suite No. 5 in E major. He first wrote some variations on the theme, which he titled Variations on Handel's The Harmonious Blacksmith. Then he used the first 16 bars of his set of variations to create Handel in the Strand, one of his most beloved pieces, of which he made several versions. Arnold Schoenberg's Concerto for String Quartet and Orchestra in B-flat major was composed after Handel's Concerto Grosso, Op. 6/7. Veneration: Handel is honored with a feast day on July 28 in the liturgical calendar of the Episcopal Church, with Johann Sebastian Bach and Henry Purcell. In the calendar of saints of the Lutheran Church, with J.S. Bach and Heinrich Schwann TZ. And in the calendar of saints prepared by the Order of St. Luke for the use of the United Methodist Church, with J.S. Bach. Film: In 1942 Handel was the subject of the British biopic The Great Mr. Handel, directed by Norman Walker and starring Wilfrid Lawson. It was made at Denham Studios by the Rank Organisation, and shot in Technicolor. See also: Handel Reference Database, Letters and Writings of Georg Friedrich Händel, List of compositions by Georg Friedrich Händel, List of operas by Handel, publications by Friedrich Trisander, Valentine Snow, Will of Georg Friedrich Händel, References, Notes. Sources: Abraham, Gerald. Handel, A Symposium. Oxford University Press. Burroughs, Donald. Handel. Oxford University Press. ISBN A0-19-816470 Zan, Burroughs, Donald. The Cambridge Companion to Handel. Cambridge University Press. ISBN A0-521-45613-4. Bukovca, Manfred F. Music in the Baroque Era Euro from Monteverdi to Bach, Read Books, UK, 2008. ISBN 14437261192. ISBN 9781443726191. Chrysochoidis, Ilias. Early reception of Handel's oratorios, 1732 €1784, narrative Studies documents, available through UMI. Chrysochoidis, Ilias. Handel at a Crossroads, his 1737 €1738 and 1738 €1739 seasons re-examined, Music and Letters 90/4. 599 €635. Chrysochoidis, Ilias. Handel, Hogarth, Goupy, Artistic Intersections in Handelian Biography, Early Music 37/4, 577 €596. Chrysochoidis, Ilias. Hee-haw. Le Loup Handel among the Vauxhall Asses, 18th Century Music July 2, 221 €262. Dean, Winton. Knapp, John Merrill. Handel's Operas, 1704 €1726 1. Oxford, Clarendon Press. ISBN A0-19-816441-6. Dean, Winton. Handel's Operas, 1726 €1741. The Boydell Press. Deutsch, Otto Erich. Handel, A Documentary Biography. Dent, Edward Joseph. Handel R. A. Kessinger Publishing. ISBN A1-4191-2275-4. Frosch, W. A., The Case of Georg Friedrich Händel, New England Journal of Medicine, 1989. 321 765 €769, September 14, 1989. Content.nean.org, Harris, Ellen T. The Librettos of Handel's Operas, a collection of 70 librettos documenting Handel's operatic career. New York, Garland, 1989. ISBN 0-8240-3862-2, Harris, Ellen T. Handel as Orpheus. Voice and Desire in the Chamber Cantatas. Harvard University Press, 2001. ISBN 0-674-00617-8, Hicks, Anthony, Handel, Georg Friedrich, Grove Musical Linnery, Hogwood, Christopher. Handel. London, Thames and Hudson, 1984. ISBN 0-500-01355-1, Keats, Jonathan. Handel, The Man and His Music. London, Vigil Lange, 1985. ISBN 0-575-03573-0, Keats, Jonathan. Handel, The Man and His Music. New York, St. Martin's Press, Larson, J.P. Handel's Messiah. London, Adams and Charles Black Limited, Leopold, Silke, de. Har Currency Del die Opern Bar Currency Reinrita 2009, ISBN 978-3-7618-1991-3, McGeary, Thomas. The Politics of Opera in Handel's Britain. Cambridge, UK, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A978-1-107-00988-2. Meynell, Hugo. The Art of Handel's Operas, The Edwin Mellen Press. ISBN 0-88946-425-1, National Portrait Gallery. Handel. A Celebration of His Life and Times 1685 €1759. Young, Percy Marshall. Handel. New York, David White Company. External links, Howell, Ian. How to Handle Spelling Har Currency Del. The Countess in a Voice, Howell, Ian. Guiding Handel's Legacy, an interview with Handel House Museum Director Sarah Bardwell. The Countess in a Voice, Edward Dent's Handel Biography from Project Gutenberg, works by Georg Friedrich Händel at Project Gutenberg, the second volume of Winton Dean for Handel's operas covering the years 1726 €1741, Friedrich Trisander's Handel Biography, Biographical Details website, Handel Houses, the Handel House Museum, the Har Currency Del House in Halle, Saxony-Anhalt. Handel Reference Database, Scores and Recordings, Free Scores by Georg Friedrich Händel at the International Music Score Library Project, includes Complete Works Edition, Free Scores by Georg Friedrich Händel and the Choral Public Domain Library. The Mutopia project provides free downloading of sheet music and MIDI files for some of Handel's works. Free typeset sheet music of Handel's works from Cantorian.org, Handel Cylinder recordings, from the Cylinder Preservation and Digitization Project at the University of California, Santa Barbara Library. Handel's sheet music by free-scores.com, Kunst der Fuge, Georg Friedrich Händel MIDI files.